Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was recruited into the secret Avengers Black Ops team. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain over Kamino was a cold, indifferent thing. It didn't wash away the grime, the blood, or the lingering scent of ozone that clung to the city like a shroud. It only smeared it, turning alleyways into slick, murky streams that reflected a sky the color of a dying television screen. For Izuku Midoriya, the rain was just another weight to carry. He stumbled, the reinforced sole of his boots scraping against loose asphalt. Every muscle screamed in protest, a chorus of agony that had become the background music to his life. His suit, the Gamma model that had once been a symbol of progress, was a tattered ruin. The armor plates were cracked, the green fabric underneath was scorched and torn, and the cowl was a shredded mess that did little to hide the haunted, hollowed-out look in his eyes. He was a ghost in his own armor, running on fumes and the faint, buzzing whispers of the dead. Careful, Ninth. The voice was a familiar echo in the vast, quiet space of his mind. Nana Shimura. Her presence was frayed, like a signal struggling to reach across an impossible distance. You are pushing the vessel past its limits. I know, he thought back, the thought itself a monumental effort. But I have to keep going. He's the last one. The last one was a Tartarus escapee named Kaido Tanaka, who had once gone by the villain named Shift. His quirk allowed him to cut small, temporary rifts in space, turning a short hallway into a mile-long sprint, or a locked door into a mere suggestion. In the chaos of the prison break, he was small fry. But now, in a city clinging to life by a thread, a man who could bypass any barricade was a terrifying wildcard. For 3 days, Deku had been hunting him. For 3 days he had barely slept, subsisting on stale protein bars and the bitter coffee of pure adrenaline. A flicker of movement at the end of the alley. A silhouette, hunched and desperate, trying to pry open the back door of a closed noodle shop. Tanaka! Deku's voice was a raw, ragged thing, torn from a throat that had shouted too many warnings and screamed too much in defiance. Shift spun around, his face a mask of gaunt panic. He was younger than Deku had expected, maybe early 20s, with wild eyes that darted everywhere at once. He wore the tattered remains of a prison jumpsuit, and in his hand, he held a shimmering tear in the air, a miniature rift no bigger than a dinner plate. It reflected the neon sign of the shop in fractured, impossible angles. Stay back, hero! Shift shrieked, his voice cracking. I just want to get away. I'm done with all this. Then surrender, Deku said, taking a slow, measured step forward. Pain lanced up his leg from a deep gash he'd taken yesterday. He ignored it. No one else has to get hurt. He's afraid, Ninth, whispered Yoichi Shigaraki, the first. His voice was the faintest of them all, a thread of light in the darkness. Fear makes people dangerous. Shift's hand trembled, and the rift in his grasp wavered. You heroes are all the same. You don't care about us. You just want to lock us back up. He flung the rift. It shot through the air, not as a projectile, but as a distortion. The space it passed through warped, stretching the brick wall behind Deku like taffy before snapping back into place. Deku sidestepped, the motion sluggish, and felt a disorienting vertigo as the air to his left momentarily ceased to exist. He had to end this. Now, he pushed off, one for all coursing through him at a strained 30%. Green lightning, duller than it should be, crackled around him. He used Black Whip, launching 2 tendrils of dark energy that slammed into the walls on either side of Shift, boxing him in. It's over, Tanaka! Panic seized the young villain. He screamed, a wordless cry of terror, and thrust both hands forward. This time, he didn't create a small, controlled cut. He tore at the air itself. A jagged, unstable wound in reality appeared between them, spitting sparks of violet and blue light. The air pressure dropped, and the rain began to fall into it, hissing as it vanished. Deku's danger sense, a dull throb that had been a constant companion for weeks, suddenly shrieked into a piercing siren. It wasn't just a warning of an attack. It was a primal scream from reality itself that something was fundamentally wrong. At that exact moment, a piece of his support gear, a new gauntlet condenser supplied by a beleaguered Detonarat subsidiary, chose to fail. It was designed to help him regulate the overwhelming output of One for All, but under the strain of the past 72 hours, a microfracture had formed in the energy regulation unit. A bead of raw, emerald energy, pure and volatile, leaked from the casing. It was a drop of gasoline on a roaring fire. The unstable rift latched onto the droplet of OFA energy. It began to swell, feeding on the power. The controlled tear became a vortex, a swirling maw of colors that had no names and physics that had no laws. The sound it made was excruciating, a high-pitched shriek that vibrated in Deku's very bones. Suddenly, a side door to a grimy apartment building flew open. A salaryman, his tie askew and smelling of cheap sake, stumbled out directly into the path of the expanding anomaly. His eyes went wide with drunken confusion, which quickly morphed into stark terror. Everything slowed down. The man, frozen in fear, shift, his face a canvas of horror at what he had unleashed. The vortex, pulling in rain, debris, and light with insatiable hunger. Deku didn't think. He didn't have time to weigh the options or consult the vestiges. There was only the core, unshakable axiom of his being. A person was in danger. He bypassed his limits. 45%. The pain was immediate and searing, like his bones were being set on fire. He ignored it. He launched himself forward, a green blur against the chaotic backdrop of the rift. St. Louis! Smash! He didn't aim for shift. He aimed for the space beside the salaryman. The wind pressure from his kick was a physical wall, a controlled hurricane that slammed into the man and sent him tumbling safely away from the vortex, crashing into a pile of overflowing trash bags. But Deku was now at ground zero. The recoil from his own attack, combined with the gravitational pull of the rift, was too much. Black whip tendrils shot out, trying to find purchase, but they dissolved as they touched the edge of the vortex. He felt a force unlike anything he had ever known seize him. It wasn't like being pushed or pulled. It was like every atom in his body was being unwound. The voices of the vestiges screamed in his mind, a cacophony of fear and confusion, before being silenced by a wave of crushing static. His vision dissolved into a kaleidoscope of impossible geometry and blinding light. The last thing he saw of his world was the terrified face of Kaido Tanaka, a villain he had been trying to save, as the alley, the city, and the very sky were pulled into a single, screaming point of light. Then, there was only the fall. The transition was not a journey. It was a cessation, and then a beginning. One moment, he was being torn apart by the universe. The next, he was crashing down with brutal finality. His body slammed into something solid and unyielding. The impact rattled his teeth and sent a fresh wave of agony through his already broken form. Metal groaned and buckled beneath him. Then he rolled, a clumsy, painful tumble, and landed hard on wet, gritty pavement. For a long moment, there was only the sound of his own ragged breathing and the steady drumming of rain. The shriek of the rift was gone. The air no longer tasted of ozone and quirk fire. It tasted of something else, exhaust, damp concrete, and the faint, greasy smell of fried food. Izuku Midoriya pushed himself onto his elbows, his head swimming. His vision was blurry, and black spots danced at the edges. He blinked, trying to clear his sight. He was in an alley. It was dark, narrow, and claustrophobic. Rain fell from a sky obscured by towering buildings that scraped at the low-hanging clouds. But it was all wrong. The architecture was different. The bricks were a darker red, the fire escapes a more intricate web of black iron. The graffiti on the walls was in a language he could read, but it felt foreign on a gut level. A discarded newspaper near a puddle had headlines in crisp, bold English. A neon sign across the narrow street buzzed fitfully, advertising Rigoletto's Pizza. A cold, dreadful feeling, heavier than his exhaustion, began to settle in his stomach. "Comms," he rasped, his hand fumbling for the side of his cowl. He tapped the receiver. "All Might? Aizawa-sensei? Can anyone hear me?" Static. Dead, empty static. He tried again, his voice trembling now. "Uraraka? Ida? Kaken? Please, respond." Only the sound of the rain answered. He was alone. Utterly, completely alone. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing what little breath he had left. He wasn't just in a different part of the city. He wasn't even in Japan. This place felt alien, the very air vibrating with an unfamiliar energy. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at the edges of his frayed consciousness. He had to get up. He had to figure out where he was. He had to find a way back. His friends, his mother, All Might, they were all fighting. They were counting on him. He had abandoned them. The weight of his mission, of one for all, pressed down on him, threatening to crush him right there on the pavement. He forced himself to his knees, his body screaming in protest. He needed to take stock. His left arm was definitely rebroken from that last smash, a familiar, agonizing throb radiating from his forearm, multiple cracked ribs. A concussion, judging by the way the world was tilting. He was a mess. I have to keep going. The mantra was a lifeline. He was so focused on his internal litany of pain and duty that he didn't notice them until they were already there. It started not with a sound, but with a feeling. A subtle shift in the shadows. The sense of being watched by more than just the blind windows of the buildings around him. He lifted his head, his green eyes scanning the darkness. And then he saw them, four figures, melting out of the deepest shadows of the alley. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace that spoke of years of training. They were clad in head-to-toe black tactical gear, devoid of any insignia. Their faces were obscured by ballistic masks and night vision goggles that glowed with a faint, eerie red. In their hands, they held advanced-looking rifles, held at a low-ready position but aimed with lethal intent. Deku's instincts, honed by months of brutal warfare, screamed threat. But they weren't villains. Villains had a certain flair, a chaotic energy. These people were professional. They were soldiers. One of them raised a hand palm flat. A universal sign to halt. A voice, filtered through a comm unit and speaking in clipped, accented English, cut through the rain. On the ground. Hands where I can see them. Deku didn't fully understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. He slowly, painfully, got to his feet. He held his hands up, showing they were empty. I don't want to fight, he said in Japanese, his voice hoarse. There's been a mistake. I need help. The soldiers didn't react. They fanned out, forming a semicircle, cutting off any escape. A red laser dot appeared on his chest, right over his heart. He could feel the sheer killing intent rolling off them. It was different from a villain's bloodlust. This was colder, more detached. The intent of a surgeon removing a tumor. His mind raced. He could fight. Even in his state, a 5% flicker would be enough to disarm them and escape. But what then? He was in an unknown place, injured, with no idea who these people were. Were they the police here? Some kind of military? Attacking them could make his situation infinitely worse. A second soldier spoke, his voice calmer. Subject is emitting a massive energy signature. Off the charts. Recommend immediate containment. Deku caught the word. Energy. They could sense one for all. That wasn't good. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands still raised. Please, he tried again, switching to the broken English he'd learned in school. I am hero. Lost. I need help. The lead soldier's rifle snapped up, the red dot now fixed between Deku's eyes. Last warning? On the ground, the standoff was thick with tension, a spark away from exploding into violence. Deku's mind was a whirlwind. Fight or surrender? Flee or talk? Every option felt like the wrong one. He was out of good choices. And then, a new voice cut through the tense silence. It was female, calm, and laced with an authority that instantly commanded the entire alley. Hold your fire. The voice came from the shadows behind the soldiers. A figure emerged, moving with a fluid grace that made the highly trained operatives look clumsy by comparison. She wasn't wearing a mask. Her face was sharp and intelligent, framed by striking red hair slicked back by the rain. She wore a similar black tactical suit, but hers was tailored, sleeker, accented with glowing blue lines. On her wrist was a sophisticated-looking gauntlet, its screen casting a soft light on her face. She stopped a few feet from the soldiers, her eyes, a piercing, analytical green, fixed on Deku. She scanned him from head to toe, her gaze missing nothing: the shredded suit, the bleeding wounds, the exhaustion in his posture, and the barely contained wellspring of power that radiated from him. "Energy readings are off the scale, Widow," the lead soldier said, not lowering his weapon. "Potential Class 7 inhuman event." "I can see that," she replied, her voice a low murmur. She took a step forward, into the no-man's land between her team and Deku. She never broke eye contact. "You're a long way from home, aren't you, kid?" Her English was clear, unaccented. Deku understood her perfectly. He just stared, unsure how to respond. Who are you?" he managed to ask, his own voice sounding small and weak. "The person who's about to have a very bad day if you don't cooperate," she said, her tone level, not unkind, but utterly uncompromising. She gestured to his hands. "You've got a lot of power simmering under the surface there. I can see it. And I don't like things I can't account for." She took another step. Deku's danger sense was a dull, confused hum. She was a threat, yes, but not in the same way as the soldiers. Theirs was the threat of a gun. Hers was the threat of a scalpel. Precise, inescapable. "I just want to go home," he said, a desperate plea coloring his words. The adrenaline was fading fast, leaving behind an ocean of bone-deep weariness. His vision started to swim again. "I'm sure you do," the woman said softly. "But for now, you're coming with us." She was talking to him, her voice a soothing, distracting rhythm. But he saw her hand move, a subtle, deliberate motion towards her gauntlet. His instincts screamed at him to dodge, to jump back, to do something. He was too slow. A flicker of blue light. A soft hiss. Two small, metallic discs shot from her gauntlet, flying through the air with unerring accuracy. Before he could even register what they were, they slapped onto the armor plating on his chest. A jolt of electricity, unlike anything he had ever felt, coursed through him. It wasn't the raw, burning pain of a lightning quirk. It was a clean, high-frequency current that bypassed his durability and targeted his nervous system directly. His muscles seized instantly, locking him in place. The green lightning of one for all sputtered and died. The world dissolved into a field of white static, his brain unable to process the overload. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even think. His last coherent sensation was the ground rushing up to meet him as his body, finally giving out, collapsed. As his consciousness spiraled into blackness, his thoughts weren't of his new captors or the strange, hostile world he'd fallen into. They were of the world he'd left behind. A world on fire, a world that needed its symbol. All Might, trusting him. His mother crying for him. Uraraka, her determined face. Ida, his unwavering loyalty. Todoroki, his quiet strength. Kaken, his explosive rival, his oldest friend. They were all still fighting. And he was here. Beaten. Captured. Lost. His last thought, a whisper in the encroaching void, was a single, devastating admission. I failed. His eye, a vibrant emerald green, reflected the slick, dark pavement of a New York City alley for a brief moment before his world went completely dark. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a series of jarring system reboots. First came sensation, a dull, throbbing ache that was a baseline map of his entire body, with sharp, stabbing pains pinpointing the major territories of injury. His left arm was a geography of agony. His ribs protested every shallow breath. He was sitting, slumped forward, his cheek pressed against something impossibly cold and smooth. Metal. Next came sound, the low, almost subliminal hum of fluorescent lights and the whisper of a ventilation system. It was a sterile, lifeless sound, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of the rain-swept alley. He tried to lift his head, and the world tilted violently. A wave of nausea washed over him. He squeezed his eyes shut, then forced them open. The room swam into focus. It was a perfect white cube, seamless and featureless, save for the steel table he was slumped over and the chair he was sitting in. The light was harsh, shadowless, and clinical. There were no windows, no doors that he could see, only what looked like a solid wall that was slightly darker than the others. He tried to push himself up, and that's when he felt the cuffs. They were heavy, thick bands of a matte black alloy clamped around his wrists, tethering him to the table. But it was more than just a physical restraint. As his mind cleared, he reached inward for the familiar, comforting warmth of One for All, the crackling sea of power that lived within him. He found nothing. It was a hollow, terrifying void. The connection to the vestiges, the very energy that defined him, was gone. It was like a phantom limb, an amputation of the soul. He could feel where it was supposed to be, a gaping emptiness that made his heart pound with a primal, suffocating panic. "He's awake!" The voice was the same one from the alley. Calm, female, precise. Deku's head snapped up. Standing in the corner of the room, previously lost in his disoriented haze, were two figures. The red-haired woman, Widow, the soldier had called her, was leaning against the wall, her arms crossed. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of professional neutrality. Beside her stood a man who was the very definition of grim. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with long, dark hair and a permanent shadow of stubble on his jaw. His eyes, a piercing blue, were fixed on Deku with an unnerving intensity. He was completely still, a predator conserving its energy. But it was his left arm that held Deku's attention. It was made of shining, segmented metal, a single red star emblazoned on the shoulder. They watched him, their silence a weapon. Deku tugged at the cuffs, the metal unyielding. The sheer wrongness of being severed from One for All was making him dizzy. "What are these?" he asked, his voice raspy. "What did you do to me?" The woman pushed off the wall, her boots making no sound on the pristine floor. She walked to the table and sat in a chair opposite him, a clinical distance between them. The man remained in the corner, a silent, brooding statue. "They're power inhibitors," she said, her tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "Specifically designed for energy-based metahumans. They create a localized dampening field that interrupts the neural pathways required to access and control anomalous biological energy. Or, in your case, whatever the hell that green lightning was." Deku stared at her, the technical jargon flying past him. All he understood was that they had somehow locked his quirk away. "You have to take them off. My power, it's not just for fighting. It's a part of me, that's the point," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Right now you're not a person. You're an unknown variable. A walking WMD that crash-landed in our backyard. My job is to know the variables." She leaned forward slightly, her green eyes sharp. "So let's start with the basics. Who are you?" Deku swallowed, his throat dry. He had to make them understand. "My name is Izuku Midoriya. I'm a student at UA High School, in the hero course." The woman's expression didn't change, but he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Skepticism. The man in the corner shifted his weight, the faintest whirring sound coming from his metal arm. "UA High School," she repeated, the name sounding foreign and strange on her tongue. "Never heard of it. And this hero course, is that like a police academy?" "No, it's a school for training pro-heroes," Deku explained, feeling the absurdity of his own words in this cold, white room. "People with special abilities called quirks. We learn to use them to save people and fight villains." "Quirks," she said, the word dripping with doubt. She glanced over at her partner. "You getting any of this, Barnes?" The man, Bucky, finally spoke. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. "Sounds like a fairy tale." "My thoughts exactly," Natasha said, turning back to Deku. "Look, kid. We ran your face, your prints, your DNA. We scanned your suit for any known terrestrial or non-terrestrial manufacturer. We found nothing. As far as our world is concerned, you don't exist." "That's because I'm not from this world," Deku blurted out, desperation creeping into his voice. "There was a villain, his quirk, it opened a portal. I was pulled through. I don't know where I am, but it's not my home." Natasha Romanoff had heard every lie imaginable. She had told most of them herself. She was a human lie detector, and every instinct she had was screaming that this boy, against all logic, was telling the truth. Or, at least, he believed he was telling the truth. The sincerity pouring off him was so potent it was almost a physical force. But the story itself was impossible. "A portal," she said flatly. "You expect us to believe you're from another dimension? It's the truth. In my world, about 80% of the population has a quirk. We have heroes, villains. Our #1 hero was a man named All Might. He was my mentor, he passed his power on to me. He trailed off, realizing how insane he sounded. Bucky took a step forward. Passed his power on? Like a baton? His voice was laced with a dark, cynical amusement. It's complicated, Deku said weakly. It's a sacred torch, a power cultivated to fight a great evil. Save it. Bucky cut in, his voice hard. I've seen what men do with power, kid. They don't just give it away. He's right, Natasha said, her gaze softening almost imperceptibly. She was changing tactics. The hard approach wasn't working. Izuku, was it? Let's focus on what we do know. Our scientists have been analyzing the ambient energy you were giving off when we found you. They've never seen anything like it. It's not cosmic, not mystical, not gamma-based. They described it as a self-sustaining biological fission-fusion reaction of impossible scale. The energy potential contained in your body is, and I'm quoting our lead physicist, enough to level a city block or power it for a year, depending on which way it breaks. She let that hang in the air. The clinical description of one for all sent a shiver down Deku's spine. To them, it wasn't a symbol of hope. It was a bomb. That's why you're in this room, she continued. That's why you're in these cuffs. We don't know what you are, but we know you're dangerous. And right now, your story about a magic school for superheroes isn't helping your case. Deku's shoulders slumped. He was exhausted, in pain, and utterly alone. They didn't believe him. Why would they? He was a freak, an anomaly they couldn't explain and therefore had to contain. The hope that had been a tiny flicker in his chest began to die. He was a prisoner. He dropped his head, his matted green hair falling over his eyes. I just want to go home. The words were a quiet, defeated whisper. The silence that followed was heavy. Natasha and Bucky exchanged a look. They had reached an impasse. The kid was either a world-class liar with a story from a comic book, or he was something far stranger, and far more tragic. Just then, the darker section of the wall slid open with a soft hiss of hydraulics, revealing a brightly lit corridor. A new figure stepped into the room, and the entire atmosphere shifted. He was tall and powerfully built, with blonde hair and a face that seemed etched with a quiet, profound sense of duty. He wore a simple jacket over a plain t-shirt, but he carried himself with an authority that dwarfed the tactical readiness of the other two. He was the kind of person who didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. He just had to be in it. He looked at Deku, and for the first time since waking up, Deku didn't feel like a specimen under a microscope. The man's blue eyes were filled not with suspicion, but with a deep, weary empathy. Nat Bucky. That's enough, he said. His voice was calm, but it held the unmistakable weight of command. Natasha immediately stood. Steve, he's a massive unknown. His story is, I know, Steve Rogers said, his eyes still on Deku. I've been listening. You two can go. I'll take it from here. Bucky looked like he wanted to argue, his metallic hand clenching and unclenching at his side. But a single look from Steve was enough. With a final, wary glance at Deku, the two spies exited the room, the door hissing shut behind them, leaving Deku alone with the newcomer. Steve pulled the chair Natasha had vacated and sat down, mirroring Deku's position across the table. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply studying the boy in front of him. He saw the scars crisscrossing his visible skin, the old, healed-over fractures that a medical scan had revealed were layered like rings on a tree. He saw the raw determination in his eyes, warring with an exhaustion so deep it was almost spiritual. I'm Steve Rogers, he said finally, his voice gentle. I apologize for the welcome. My team can be thorough. Deku just nodded, not trusting his own voice. I reviewed the footage from the alley. Steve continued, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the table. All of it. The security cameras, the body cams on my people. I saw the whole thing. He paused, letting the words sink in. I saw you crash land in a world you don't know. I saw you surrounded by armed soldiers. And I saw you try to de-escalate. But that's not what caught my attention. Steve's gaze became more focused, more intense. Before all that. Before you came through your portal. The cameras on the street caught the lead up. I saw you fighting that man, and then I saw the civilians stumble out of the building. You had a choice. A split-second choice. Apprehend the threat, or save the innocent. You didn't hesitate. Deku looked up, his eyes widening slightly. You chose to save him, Steve said, a note of profound respect in his voice. You put yourself in harm's way, took the full brunt of that anomaly, just to push a complete stranger out of the way. That's not the action of a threat, son. That's the action of a hero. The word, hero, spoken with such simple, unadorned sincerity, struck Deku like a physical blow. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, hot and unwelcome. He hadn't been called that in what felt like a lifetime. In his vigilante days, he was a specter, a myth, a dark monster to the very people he was trying to save. To hear it now, from this stranger, in this sterile white prison, it was almost too much. It's my duty, Deku mumbled, echoing the creed that had been drilled into him. A hero's job is to save everyone they can. A sad smile touched Steve's lips. That's a heavy burden to carry. He leaned back in his chair, his expression turning serious. Which brings us to why you're here. My friends are right to be cautious. We live in a complicated world. After certain events, my team and I were forced to operate outside the law. We became ghosts. We handle the threats that the world isn't ready to see, the ones that hide in the shadows. He let out a slow breath. We deal with an organization called HYDRA. They're a cancer. An old evil that believes humanity can't be trusted with its own freedom. They use fear and chaos to achieve their goals. For every head we cut off, 2 more grow back. Deku listened intently, the name Hydra resonating with the stories of villains from his own world. All for one, the League of Villains, the Liberation Army. The shape of evil was the same, no matter the dimension. Recently, a Hydra splinter cell has emerged, Steve explained. They're more radical, more dangerous than what we've faced before. They're developing a new kind of weapon, something that could destabilize the entire global order. We've been trying to stop them, but we're short-handed. We lost someone. A heavy hitter, and we're outmatched. Steve looked directly into Deku's eyes, his gaze steady and honest. And then you fell out of the sky. A boy with enough power to level a city, who uses it to save one stranger at the cost of himself. He paused, the unspoken offer hanging in the air between them, thick and heavy. I can't promise you a way home, Mizuku. The science behind what happened to you is beyond anything we currently understand. But I can promise you we have resources. The best minds on the planet. If there is a way back, we will dedicate ourselves to finding it. We won't stop looking. But in the meantime, Steve continued, his voice dropping slightly, we need help. I need your help. Hydra is planning something, and we don't have the firepower to meet them head-on. They will hurt innocent people. A lot of them. He laid his cards on the table. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a manipulation. It was a simple, brutal truth. Join us, Steve said. Fight with us. Help us save this world, and I swear to you, we will do everything in our power to get you back to yours. It was the devil's bargain. A chance at salvation wrapped in a soldier's duty. An offer of purpose in exchange for service. Deku's mind was a maelstrom. Every instinct screamed at him to accept. Here was a man, a hero he could recognize, offering him a chance to do what he was born to do, save people. The threat of Hydra was a tangible evil, a problem he could punch, a mission he could understand. It was a lifeline in the abyss of his despair, but the guilt was a physical weight in his chest. His friends. They were fighting Shigaraki, fighting all for one. They were in the fight of their lives, and he wasn't there. He had run. He had failed. How could he possibly agree to fight someone else's war when his own was still raging? He could see their faces in his mind's eye. Uraraka's fierce determination. Ida's unwavering righteousness. Todoroki's quiet resolve. Kaken would be furious, would be pushing himself past every limit to pick up the slack, cursing Deku's name with every explosive blast. He was abandoning them. The vestiges were silent, cut off by the cuffs, but he could feel the echo of their shared will. You cannot save those you cannot reach. He looked at Steve, at the sincerity etched into the lines on his face. This man wasn't all might. He didn't have a dazzling smile or a booming laugh. He was quieter, weighed down by a history of hard choices and necessary evils. But the spirit was the same. The unshakable core of a true hero. What would All Might do in his situation? Would he sit in a cell, consumed by what he'd lost? Or would he stand up and fight the evil that was right in front of him? The answer was immediate. A hero saves people. Period. It didn't matter where, or when, or in what dimension. The duty was absolute. Sitting here, rotting in a cell while people were in danger, would be the real betrayal. It would be a betrayal of All Might's gift. A betrayal of everyone who had ever believed in him. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the first one that didn't feel like it was being stolen by panic. He met Steve's gaze, and for the first time, his own held not just fear, but resolve. "I'll do it," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I'll help you fight Hydra." A visible wave of relief washed over Steve. "But I have one condition," Deku added, his voice hardening. "You said you would look for a way to get me home. That can't just be a side project. It has to be a priority. My world needs me." "I made a promise," Steve nodded without hesitation. "You have my word. We pursue both goals with everything we have." He stood up and offered a hand to Deku. It wasn't a handshake, but a gesture to the cuffs. "Then let's get you out of these." He pressed a button on a small, discreet remote from his pocket. The inhibitors hissed and clicked open. The moment they fell away, one for all rushed back into him. It was an overwhelming flood of warmth and power, 1,000 voices whispering welcome home in the back of his mind. Green lightning, faint but vibrant, danced across his skin for a split second before he brought it under control. The hollow feeling was gone, replaced by the familiar, comforting fire. He felt whole again. He slowly got to his feet, his legs shaky but holding. He was still injured, still exhausted, but he was no longer just a prisoner. He had a mission. He had a purpose. "Every soldier needs a call sign," Steve said, a faint smile on his lips. "Something for the comms, to protect your identity. Given that you're the first sign of a new kind of power on our side, and you'll likely be the one leading the charge." "I was thinking Vanguard." Deku tested the word in his mind. Vanguard. The forefront. The one who goes first. It felt right. It felt heavy. It felt like a responsibility he could bear. "Vanguard," Deku repeated, nodding. "I like it. Welcome to the team, Vanguard," Steve said, and this time, he offered his hand for a proper handshake. Deku took it. Steve's grip was firm, solid, the grip of a man who had carried the weight of the world and had not been broken by it. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them, soldier to soldier, hero to hero. As he stood in the sterile white room, a universe away from everything he had ever known, Izuku Midoriya was no longer just Deku, the successor to All Might. He was Vanguard, a hero recruited into the shadows, his own world's war traded for another's. The path ahead was dark and uncertain, but for the first time since he'd fallen through the fire, he could see a flicker of light. The Avengers' secret base was a place of ghosts and echoes. Tucked away in a repurposed Cold War bunker deep in the Adirondack Mountains, it was a warren of stark concrete corridors, humming server farms, and state-of-the-art facilities that felt less like a home and more like a high-tech mausoleum. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a cage, a school, and a sanctuary all at once. The week following his recruitment was a blur of calculated agony designed to break him down and rebuild him into something that could survive in the shadows. His training began not in a gym, but in darkness. "You're too loud." Natasha Romanoff's voice was a disembodied whisper in his ear, transmitted through a small comm unit. Izuku froze, every muscle tensed. He was in the labyrinth, a sprawling, multi-level training course designed to simulate an infiltration. It was pitch black, and the air was chilled. He had been trying to navigate a corridor filled with a web of laser tripwires, his own heavy breathing sounding like a hurricane in the oppressive silence. "I can hear your heartbeat from the observation room, Vanguard," she continued, her tone flat and devoid of encouragement. "I can hear the fabric of your uniform rustling. I can practically hear you thinking. In our world, thinking is loud. It gets you killed." He took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to calm the jackhammer rhythm in his chest. He was crouched low, his senses on fire. He could feel the faintest vibration in the floor, see the ghost image of the laser grid with the specialized contact lenses they'd given him. He was using every bit of his analytical mind, but it wasn't enough. He was a hero, trained for dynamic, head-on confrontations. This skulking, this erasure of self was alien to him. He took another step, placing his foot down with painstaking care. Beep beep beep. The room was instantly flooded with harsh red light. A dozen simulated gun turrets popped out of the walls, their targeting lasers painting his chest. "You're dead," Natasha's voice stated, matter of fact. "You just alerted the guards, compromised the mission, and got your entire team killed. Again. Start over." The lights went out. The turrets retracted. He was back at the beginning. This was his 7th failure in less than an hour. Frustration, hot and sharp, pricked at him. He could clear this room in less than a second. A 5% flicker, a touch of black whip, and he'd be through. But that was the point. He wasn't allowed to use one for all. He had to use his body, his senses, his mind. He had to learn to be small. He spent days with Natasha in the labyrinth. She was a relentless, unforgiving teacher. She taught him to control his breathing until it was a shallow, silent rhythm. She taught him to walk heel to toe, distributing his weight like a cat. She made him sit in absolute darkness for an hour at a time, just listening, learning to map a room by the echo of a dripping pipe or the hum of a computer terminal. "Every place has a rhythm," she told him once, her face illuminated only by the pale glow of a monitor. "The guards' patrol route, the hum of the ventilation, the flow of data. You don't break into a place, you become a part of its rhythm, and you move with it. Right now, you're a drum solo in the middle of a string quartet." He started to learn. He began using his quirks in ways he never had before. He used float to hover an inch off the ground, bypassing pressure plates that had caught him dozens of times. He used danger sense not as a warning of attack, but as a fine-tuned instrument to feel the subtle shifts in air pressure caused by hidden cameras panning. It was a slow, grueling process of unlearning everything UA had taught him about being a hero. He was learning how to be a ghost. If Natasha's training was a lesson in silent precision, Bucky Barnes's was a masterclass in brutal efficiency. Their sessions took place on a simple padded mat in the center of a cavernous gymnasium. The only rule was the one Bucky laid out on the first day, his voice a low growl. "No powers." Deku had nodded, confident in his basic hand-to-hand skills honed by Aizawa. That confidence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Bucky didn't spar. He dismantled. His movements were a terrifying fusion of military CQC, covert ops takedowns, and a century of battlefield experience. There was no wasted motion, no flashy kicks or telegraphed punches. Every block flowed into a strike, every parry into a joint lock. His metal arm was a terrifying instrument, moving with inhuman speed and precision, but it was his human arm that was more dangerous. It was faster than Deku could track, delivering short, sharp jabs that targeted nerve clusters and threw him completely off balance. Deku, stripped of his super speed and strength, was a clumsy amateur. He relied on instincts forged in high-power combat, instincts that were now liabilities. He'd wind up for a punch that would have shattered concrete, and Bucky would simply step inside his guard, tap his elbow to hyperextend the joint, and sweep his leg out from under him. Thump. Deku hit the mat, the wind knocked out of him. "Get up!" Bucky ordered, his face an unreadable mask. Deku scrambled to his feet, his lungs burning. He came at Bucky again, trying to use his analytical brain to predict his opponent's moves. It was useless. Bucky had no patterns. He was a force of pure, reactive violence. A block to the head was followed by a knee to the thigh. An attempt at a grapple was met with a thumb gouging into the pressure point behind his ear, making his vision swim. "You think too much," Bucky grunted, catching Deku's fist and using his momentum to throw him across the room. "You're trying to win a chess match. This is a knife fight in a phone booth." Day after day, Deku left those sessions covered in bruises, his pride just as battered as his body. Bucky never offered a word of praise. The only feedback he gave was pain. But Deku was a stubborn student. He started to see the lessons hidden in the beatings. He saw how Bucky used his entire body as a weapon, how he controlled the center of gravity in a fight, how every single move was designed to end the confrontation as quickly and decisively as possible. One afternoon, after being thrown to the mat for what felt like the 100th time, Deku lay there, gasping for air. He didn't get up immediately. He watched Bucky. The way he stood, perfectly balanced. The way his eyes darted, constantly assessing. He wasn't just a brawler. He was a living weapon, and his mind was the firing pin. Deku pushed himself up, slower this time. As Bucky came in, instead of trying to meet force with force, Deku did something different. He remembered Bucky's own move from a dozen sessions before. He dropped his center of gravity, deflected the punch rather than blocking it, and used the momentum to attempt a simple leg sweep. It was sloppy. It was clumsy. But for a split second, it broke Bucky's rhythm. The Winter Soldier adjusted instantly, of course, planting his foot and sending a backhand that snapped Deku's head to the side. But it had worked. Deku hit the mat again, a trickle of blood running from his lip. He looked up, expecting the same stony silence. Instead, Bucky stood over him, his expression unchanged, but he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. In Bucky's silent language, it was a roar of approval. Clint Barton's training was a welcome relief. Where Natasha was a scalpel and Bucky was a sledgehammer, Clint was a Swiss Army knife. His lessons were about improvisation, teamwork, and remembering the human element. "All right, Vanguard," Clint said, tossing Deku a small, metallic object. "You, me, and this paperclip need to get past that electronically locked door. Go." They were in the Kill House, a reconfigurable set of rooms designed for tactical drills. Clint's approach was chaotic and unpredictable. He'd cut the lights, disable their comms, or suddenly declare that Deku's left arm was broken, and he couldn't use it. "You're too used to being a one-man army, kid," Clint explained as they took cover behind a simulated wall, foam bullets whizzing past them. "You've got a whole toolbox of powers, and that's great, but you forget you've got a team. Sometimes the best tool for the job is me putting an arrow through a junction box from 300 yards away while you're still trying to figure out how to punch your way through." Clint taught Deku how to read his teammates, how to communicate with hand signals, and how to use the environment to his advantage. More than that, he taught Deku how to think outside the confines of his own abilities. He was the one who grounded Deku, reminding him that beneath the codenames and the Black Ops gear, they were just people trying to do a job. He was sarcastic, easygoing, and the closest thing Deku had to a normal conversation partner. Slowly, painfully, Izuku Midoriya was being reforged. He was still a hero at his core, but the edges were being sharpened, the idealistic shine being burnished into a harder, more practical gleam. He was becoming Vanguard. The mission briefing came on a Tuesday. The team gathered in the main operations center, a dark room dominated by a massive holographic display. The air crackled with a low, focused energy. Steve Rogers stood before the display, his expression grim. "All right, let's get to it. For the past 2 weeks, we've been tracking a series of encrypted communications between a known Hydra shell corporation and a weapons cartel operating out of Madripoor." A map of the island nation appeared on the screen, a chaotic sprawl of neon and shadows. Madripoor. Deku had learned about it from the base's databanks. A lawless pirate sanctuary in Southeast Asia, a haven for criminals, mercenaries, and spies. "Our intel suggests Hydra is looking to acquire a new piece of cloaking technology," Steve continued. "It's experimental, portable, and leaves no energy signature. If they get their hands on it, their operatives will be virtually undetectable. We can't let that happen." He pointed to a specific location on the map, a grimy, industrial shipyard in the Lowtown district. "The deal is going down tonight at 2300 hours. A Hydra buyer is meeting the cartel's representative to exchange a case of bearer bonds for the prototype. This is a simple intel grab. We need to photograph the buyer, plant a tracker on the prototype case, and get out. I want this clean. Ghost in, ghost out. No engagement unless absolutely necessary." All eyes turned to Deku. This was his first time in the field with them. "Vanguard," Natasha said, her voice crisp and professional. "You're on Overwatch. There's a cargo crane on the north side of the shipyard, here." She highlighted a spot on the map. "It'll give you a clear, unobstructed view of the meeting point. You will have a rifle with a high-resolution camera. Your job is to be our eyes, to provide surveillance, and to report any unexpected variables. That is all. You do not move. You do not engage. You do not make a sound. Am I clear? Crystal clear, Deku said, his stomach tightening into a knot. A pair of eyes. After all the grueling training, he was being relegated to the sidelines. He understood why. He was the rookie, the unknown quantity. But it still stung. Good, Steve said, his gaze firm but reassuring. We all have our roles. Natasha and Bucky will be on the ground, blending in with the dockworkers, ready to plant the tracker. Clint will be on a rooftop to the east, providing sniper support and covering our exfiltration route. I'll coordinate from the Quinjet. Everyone know their part? Nods all around. The plan was simple, elegant, and had a dozen contingencies. It was a classic Black Ops mission. And it was the absolute worst possible scenario for a hero who had been taught to always rush in. The air in Madripoor was thick and wet, a soupy mixture of sea salt, diesel fumes, and frying noodles. Neon signs in a dozen languages bled across the slick, rain-dampened streets, reflecting in puddles of questionable water. From his perch high atop the cargo crane, Deku had a god's-eye view of the chosen meeting point, a small, isolated clearing amidst towering stacks of shipping containers. He was clad in a new tactical suit, a matte black version of his usual gear, stripped of any bright colors. The sniper rifle in his hands felt alien and heavy. He wasn't a killer. He never even held a real gun before. This one, Clint had assured him, fired camera drones and trackers, but its lethal potential was a cold, hard fact. Through the rifle's advanced scope, the world was a high-definition stage. He could see every detail with unnerving clarity. The nervous sweat on the arms dealer's brow, the cold arrogance of the Hydra buyer, the way their bodyguards kept their hands close to their weapons. Comms check. Steve's voice crackled in his ear. Hawkeye in position. I've got eyes on you, Nat, came Clint's reply. Winter Soldier moving into place. Bucky's voice was a low rumble. Widow approaching the target container, Natasha reported, her voice calm as ice. Deku watched as Natasha and Bucky, disguised as grimy dockworkers, moved with practiced ease through the shadows, melting into the background. They were incredible. Vanguard report, Steve prompted. Deku took a breath. Vanguard in position. I have eyes on the targets. 4 cartel members, 3 Hydra agents. The buyer is opening the case of bonds. For 10 minutes, everything went according to plan. The deal was made. The cartel leader presented a reinforced metallic briefcase, the prototype. Natasha was moving in, a silent shadow, preparing to plant the magnetic tracker as the case was being inspected. It was a perfect surgical operation, and then, a variable, a handful of dockworkers, their shift apparently ending, stumbled into the clearing. They were laughing, oblivious, heading for a shortcut through the containers. Deku's heart leaped into his throat. Steve, we have civilians approaching the meeting zone, Deku reported, his voice tight. 6 of them. They're walking right into it. Copy that, Vanguard, Steve replied, his tone hardening. Nat, Bucky, hold your positions. Let's see how this plays out. The HYDRA agents noticed the workers immediately. Their casual posture vanished, replaced by a deadly stillness. The lead agent barked a sharp command in German. One of his men stepped forward, his hand disappearing inside his coat. The dockworkers froze, the laughter dying on their lips. One of them, the foreman perhaps, raised his hands in a placating gesture, trying to explain in broken English that they were just passing through. Tell them to leave. The arms dealer hissed at the Hydra buyer. This is supposed to be a sterile environment. They have seen our faces. The Hydra agent replied coldly. There can be no witnesses. Deku's blood ran cold. He knew what was coming. He zoomed in with the scope. He saw the subtle bulge of a suppressed pistol under the agent's jacket. He saw the fear in the dockworker's eyes, and then he saw her. Hiding behind one of the workers, clutching his leg, was a little girl, no older than 7. Her eyes were wide with terror, her small face pale in the harsh, industrial lighting. A memory, sharp and painful, lanced through Deku's mind. Eri cowering behind him. Koda alone on that cliffside. Children in danger. It was his ultimate trigger, the one thing that could make him throw all logic and reason to the wind. Steve, they're going to kill them, Deku whispered into the calm, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. They're going to execute them all. The little girl, too. Hold your position, Vanguard. Steve's voice was a steel command. Hawkeye, do you have a non-lethal solution? Negative. Clint's reply was grim. Too many targets, too much crossfire. I can't guarantee the safety of the civilians. Natasha, Bucky, prepare to engage on my mark, Steve ordered. But Deku knew it would be too late. The HYDRA agent was already raising his weapon. In the fraction of a second it would take for Steve to give the order, for Clint to fire, for Nat and Bucky to close the distance, those people would be dead. The girl would be dead. The mission parameters, Natasha's harsh lessons, Steve's orders, they all evaporated in a blaze of pure, unadulterated heroic instinct. What's the point of the mission if we let people die right in front of us? He couldn't watch. He wouldn't. He dropped the rifle. Vanguard, what are you doing? Steve's voice was a roar in his ear. Stand down. That is a direct order. Deku ignored him. He took a deep breath, and for the first time that night, he let the warm sea of one for all flood his limbs. Green lightning, brilliant and defiant, crackled around him in the darkness. He didn't jump towards the fight. That would be reckless. Instead, he turned his attention to a massive, 20-ton shipping container stacked precariously nearby. He braced himself, sinking into a low stance. 20%. Detroit smash. He drove his fist into the corrugated steel. The sound wasn't a gunshot, it was a thunderclap. The entire container crumpled like a tin can, the impact sending a shockwave through the shipyard. It teetered for a moment, then crashed to the ground with a deafening, earth-shaking boom that echoed across the water. Chaos erupted. Every single person in the clearing, Hydra, cartel, and civilian, was thrown off their feet by the sheer force and sound. Car alarms began blaring all over the shipyard. Lights flickered on in nearby buildings. It was the ultimate diversion. A massive, unsubtle, and utterly insane breach of protocol. Now! Deku yelled into his comm. In the confusion, the dockworkers, including the man and his terrified daughter, scrambled away into the darkness. Natasha and Bucky moved like lightning. Natasha snatched the prototype case from the stunned arms dealer's hand while Bucky, a blur of motion, disarmed the Hydra agents with a series of brutal, non-lethal takedowns. Clint's arrows zipped from the darkness, embedding tranquilizers into the cartel guards before they could even raise their weapons. In less than 10 seconds, it was over. The hostiles were neutralized, the civilians were safe, and the prototype was secure. The mission was a success. A messy, loud, catastrophic success. The flight back to the base was conducted in absolute silence. It was heavier and more suffocating than any lecture could ever be. Deku sat by himself, the now useless sniper rifle at his feet. He could feel the weight of their collective stares. Natasha's was cold fury. Clint's was disappointed surprise. Bucky's was unreadable, as always. Steve hadn't said a word since they'd lifted off. Deku stared at his hands. He had saved them. He knew he had. The image of the little girl's terrified face was burned into his memory. He didn't regret his choice, but the crushing weight of his disobedience, of betraying the trust of his new team, was a heavy burden. They didn't speak until they were all standing in the debriefing room. The door hissed shut, sealing them in. Natasha was the first to speak, her voice dangerously quiet. What in the absolute hell was that? She rounded on Deku, her eyes blazing. I spent weeks training you. I taught you subtlety, silence, discipline. And the very first chance you get, you punch a shipping container? You turned a surgical strike into a goddamn fireworks display. You alerted every port authority, police force, and rival gang in a 5-mile radius to our presence. They were going to kill those people, Natasha, Deku said, his voice quiet but firm. There was no time. There is always time for the plan, she shot back, stepping closer. Your job was to be our eyes, not our conscience. You painted a target on our backs. That little girl you were so desperate to save would be just as dead, along with the rest of us, if we weren't the best in the world at cleaning up messes like the one you made. Natasha, that's enough, Steve said, his voice low. No, it's not enough, she retorted, turning her glare on Steve. He disobeyed a direct order from his commanding officer. In any other unit, that would get him locked in a cage for the rest of his life. We can't operate like this. We can't afford a wild card who throws the mission away because his feelings get hurt. I didn't throw the mission away, Deku insisted, his own frustration bubbling to the surface. We got the prototype, didn't we? Everyone is safe. What is the point of all this, of fighting HYDRA, if we stand by and watch innocent people get executed right in front of us? What's the difference between us and them, then? The room fell silent at his question. It hung in the air, a direct challenge to the very foundation of their clandestine world. Steve looked at Deku, then at Natasha. His face was a mask of conflicting duties. He broke protocol, Nat. You're right. There will be consequences. He then turned his gaze fully to Deku, and his eyes weren't angry. They were weary. But he's not wrong either. He walked to the center of the room. Our line of work is about making impossible choices. Sometimes, saving the many means sacrificing the few. That is the cold, hard math of what we do, but we can't afford to let that math erase our humanity. We can't lose the part of ourselves that screams when we see a child in the line of fire. He looked at Deku, a deep, searching look. Your actions were reckless, impulsive, and endangered this entire team. You will be confined to the base and put on probation until I decide you've earned my trust back. But, you saved those people. You upheld the most important principle of being a hero. Don't ever apologize for that. Natasha stared, her jaw tight, clearly disagreeing but respecting Steve's final word. Clint just shook his head, running a hand over his face. Deku stood there, weathering the storm of reprimand and validation. He had failed as a spy, but he had succeeded as a hero. He didn't know if he could ever be both. As the meeting broke up and the others began to file out, Bucky Barnes walked past him. He stopped for just a second, close enough that only Deku could hear him. His voice was a low, gravelly whisper. That thing you did, being a blunt instrument when they wanted a scalpel. Deku looked up, meeting the Winter Soldier's intense, haunted gaze. It was stupid, Bucky said. It was dangerous. He paused, and for the first time, Deku saw a flicker of something other than ice in his eyes. It was a sliver of grudging respect. But it was your choice to make. Don't let them beat that out of you. And with that, he was gone, leaving Deku alone with the consequences of his actions, and the impossible paradox of his new life. He was a hero in a world that needed soldiers, a beacon of light in a team that lived in the dark. His trial by fire was over, but he had a sinking feeling that the real test had just begun. Probation, in a secret underground bunker, was a special kind of purgatory. It wasn't a cell. It was a state of being. Izuku was confined to the base, which, given its subterranean location miles from civilization, wasn't much of a change. The real punishment was the isolation. Team briefings happened without him. Tactical meetings were held behind closed doors. He was an outsider again, a powerful asset kept on a short leash, the team's resident nuclear option and its greatest liability. The silence was the worst part. Natasha treated him with a cold, professional distance, her interactions limited to terse corrections during his continued, mandatory stealth training. Clint, usually a source of levity, offered only tight, disappointed smiles. Steve was busy, coordinating a dozen micro-operations across the globe, his conversations with Deku brief and focused, laced with the unspoken weight of command. The bunker became a cavern of ghosts. Deku's own ghosts, the memories of his friends, the smiling face of All Might, the desperate urgency of the war he'd left behind, and the ghosts that haunted the very walls of this place, the unspoken histories of the hardened soldiers he now lived among. He poured his frustration and loneliness into his training, pushing his body to its absolute limits, hoping that physical exhaustion could somehow quiet the screaming in his mind. He found a grim sort of solace in the base's gymnasium, usually late at night when the cavernous space was empty and silent, save for the rhythmic squeak of his training shoes and the percussive thud of his fists against the heavy bag. It was a place where he could unleash a fraction of his power, letting the crackle of green lightning be his only companion. One night, or what passed for night in a place with no sun, he was working the bag with a relentless ferocity. He wasn't just training, he was punishing himself. Each blow was a penance. Thwack, for disobeying orders. Thwack, for endangering the team. Thwack, for not being good enough, smart enough, controlled enough. He moved in a blur, sweat flying from his brow, his breath coming in harsh, ragged gasps. He was so lost in his self-flagellation that he didn't hear the soft whir of servos until a voice cut through the haze. "You're going to break it!" Deku froze, his fist hovering inches from the swinging bag. He turned. Bucky Barnes was standing in the doorway, a shadow in the dim lighting. He was dressed in simple sweats, his metal arm gleaming under the single overhead light. He wasn't looking at the bag. He was looking at Deku's hands, which were wrapped but already starting to bleed through the fabric. "It's reinforced," Deku mumbled, stepping back from the bag, his chest heaving. He suddenly felt exposed, his private ritual interrupted. Bucky walked into the gym, his footsteps silent on the padded mats. He didn't say anything else, simply moved to a bench and began methodically retaping his own hands. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of tearing tape and Deku's ragged breathing. It was uncomfortable, but it wasn't hostile. Deku, unsure of the protocol for this strange, silent man, went back to the bag, but his rhythm was gone. His punches were hesitant, the fire in them doused by self-consciousness. "You're off balance," Bucky said without looking up. "Your footing is sloppy. You're putting all the force into your shoulders, not your core. You'll tear a rotator cuff." It wasn't a criticism, it was a clinical observation. Deku stopped again, looking down at his feet. Bucky was right. He was all raw, unfocused anger. "I know," Deku admitted quietly. "I'm just working through some things." Bucky finished wrapping his hands and stood up. He walked over to another heavy bag, a few feet from Deku's. For a moment, Deku thought he was going to offer some advice, to correct his form. Instead, Bucky just started punching. His form was perfect. It was a brutal, beautiful economy of motion. Each punch exploded from his center, his hips and torso twisting in perfect synchronization, delivering devastating force with minimal effort. The bag didn't just swing, it shuddered, the chain holding it groaning in protest. There was no wasted energy, no anger. It was just work. It was the movement of a man who had turned his body into a perfectly calibrated weapon over 100 years of violence. They trained in silence for nearly an hour, two solitary figures in the vast gym, each lost in their own world but bound by the shared rhythm of their work. The initial tension slowly bled away, replaced by a strange, unspoken camaraderie. Finally, Deku's arms felt like lead. He stepped back from the bag, his entire body trembling with exhaustion. He slid down the wall, his back against the cool concrete, and sat on the mat, his head in his hands. Bucky stopped, his own breathing barely elevated. He walked over and sat on the bench, methodically unwrapping his knuckles. "Heard what you said," Bucky said, his voice a low rumble. "In the debriefing. About what makes us different from them." Deku looked up, surprised. "It was a stupid question," Bucky continued, not unkindly. "But it was an honest one. That's rare around here." He paused, his gaze distant, as if looking at something 1,000 miles and 70 years away. "The difference is choice. That's it. That's the whole thing." He looked at his metal arm, then his flesh and blood one. "They took my choices away. Pointed me at a target and pulled the trigger. For 50 years I was just a gun. The worst part wasn't the killing, it was the not choosing. Waking up and not knowing if the thoughts in your head are your own." Deku listened, utterly captivated. He knew the broad strokes of Bucky's history. Steve had given him the sanitized shield file, but hearing it from the man himself, in this quiet, unguarded moment, was something else entirely. It was the testimony of a ghost. "You're a lot like him, you know," Bucky said, nodding his head in a direction that Deku instinctively knew meant Steve. "All that self-righteous, save everyone, jump on the grenade bullshit. It's gonna get you killed. It's a hero's job." Deku started, the familiar refrain on his lips. "No," Bucky cut him off, his voice sharp. "It's your job to make the choice. Any choice. The one you made in Madripoor, it was reckless. It almost got everyone killed. But it was yours. You saw the variables, you rejected the math, and you chose. That's everything. He looked at Deku, his blue eyes holding a profound, ancient sadness. Don't ever let anyone take that away from you. Not Steve, not Romanoff, not even the dead guys you talk to in your head. Deku flinched. How did you know about? A dark, humorless smile touched Bucky's lips. I know what it's like to have voices in your head, kid. Just make sure you're the one giving the orders. He stood up, his impromptu therapy session apparently over. Your footwork is still trash, he said, his gruff demeanor snapping back into place. Fix it. He walked out, leaving Deku alone in the silence. The conversation had been short, cryptic, and strangely profound. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't friendship, not yet. It was something more elemental. It was recognition. One haunted soldier seeing the nascent ghost in another. And for the first time since the debriefing, Deku felt a sliver of the crushing weight on his shoulders begin to lift. His training with Natasha continued, but the dynamic had shifted. The cold fury was gone, replaced by a demanding, almost academic pragmatism. She seemed to have accepted his inherent nature as an unguided missile, and was now focused on at least making him an accurate one. She pushed him harder than ever in the labyrinth, but now she added a new layer. She introduced scenarios with simulated civilians, holographic men, women, and children who would wander into his path at the worst possible moments. The world isn't a sterile training course, Vanguard, she explained, her voice in his ear as he froze, mid-crawl, a holographic child having appeared directly on top of a pressure plate he was about to disarm. It's messy. It's full of unpredictable people who will do the stupidest things at the worst possible times. Your instinct is to save them. A noble instinct. A stupid one, but noble. So, let's make it useful. You need to learn how to save someone without compromising the mission. He failed. Over and over. His attempts to quickly move the holograms would trip alarms. His diversions would draw attention. He was trying to apply the logic of a battlefield hero to the delicate art of espionage. One evening, after a particularly frustrating session, he found her in one of the base's small, quiet lounges. She was sitting in an armchair, nursing a cup of tea, and staring at a blank monitor, as if watching a film only she could see. She looked tired. Not physically, but spiritually. Deku hesitated in the doorway, not wanting to intrude. Come in, kid, she said without turning. Stop lurking. It's creepy. He walked in sheepishly, taking a seat on the opposite couch. Sorry about today's session. I'm still not getting it. She took a slow sip of her tea. No, you're not. You still think you can have it all. Save the hostage, get the intel, take down the bad guys, and everyone goes home for shawarma. That's a fairy tale. She finally turned to look at him, her gaze direct and unsparing. Do you know what a ledger is, Izuku? He nodded. It's for accounting. Keeping track of debts and credits. Exactly, she said. My ledger is full. It's dripping red. For every mission I completed, for every piece of intel I retrieved, for every life I theoretically saved, there's a cost. A hospital I had to blow up. An informant I had to sacrifice. A good man I had to let die because saving him would have jeopardized the mission and cost 100 more lives. Her voice was calm, a recitation of facts, but Deku could feel the immense weight behind the words. This was her confession. What we do, what you've been dragged into, is a world of triage, she continued. We stop the bleeding. We save the patient. But sometimes, to do that, you have to amputate. You have to cut away a part to save the whole. Every time you go into the field, you will be faced with choices where every single option is wrong. Your job is to pick the least wrong one, the one that puts the least amount of red in your ledger. She looked down into her teacup. Your problem is you think you can find a fourth option, a magic solution where no one gets hurt. Your stunt in Madripoor worked. Once. It was a 1 in a million shot that didn't get us all killed. You can't build a career on 1 in a million shots. Sooner or later, the odds catch up. And the red starts to pile up. She was trying to warn him. Trying to prepare him for the impossible choices she knew were coming. She was trying to arm him against the idealism she saw as his greatest weakness. I understand, Deku said quietly, though he wasn't sure he truly did. His entire philosophy was built on the idea of finding that fourth option, of plus ultra. To accept that sometimes there was only loss felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for. No, you don't, she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. But you might someday. And I'm trying to make sure you survive long enough to get there. The conversation ended, leaving Deku with a profound sense of melancholy. He saw now that Natasha wasn't just a cold-hearted spy. She was a woman who had been forced to make so many terrible choices that she had encased her heart in ice to keep it from breaking. And she looked at him and saw a bright, burning flame that she knew this dark, cold world would try its best to extinguish. With his days filled with grueling training and his nights with haunting conversations, Deku sought refuge in the one place that was truly his own, the silent, vast expanse of his inner world, the realm of One for All. He would sit cross-legged on the floor of his small, Spartan room, close his eyes, and meditate. It was a technique he'd been honing, a way to commune with the vestiges, the previous users of his quirk. In his own world, this inner sanctum was a stark, shadowy space where the vestiges appeared as clear, distinct figures, their voices a counsel of wisdom and warning. Here, it was different. When he reached inward, the space was distorted. It was like trying to tune a radio in the middle of a hurricane. The familiar shadowy plane was there, but it was filled with shimmering static, fractured by lines of multicolored light that resembled the portal that had brought him here. The connection was damaged, stretched thin across an impossible dimensional gulf. He focused, pushing through the static, calling out to them. Can anyone hear me? Faint, ghostly images flickered at the edge of his perception. Daigoro Banjo, the fifth user, a blur of motion. And, the sixth, wreathed in ephemeral smoke. But their forms were unstable, their voices lost in the storm. He pushed deeper, searching for the ones he knew best. He found the second and third, their faces resolute but turned away from him, their silence a heavy, unyielding wall, just as it had been at home. He found Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, a faint beacon of light, his presence a comforting warmth but his voice too weak to form words. He was about to give up, the effort leaving him mentally drained, when a single voice cut through the noise, clearer than the others. Ninth, it was Nana Shimura. Her form coalesced before him, more solid than the others but still translucent, like an old photograph. Her smile was still there, but it was strained, her eyes filled with a deep, cosmic worry. Nana-san! He projected, relief flooding him. I'm here! Can you see where I am? Can you help me find a way back? Her image wavered. The connection is weak, Izuku. We are far away. This reality, it hums on a different frequency. It is difficult to maintain focus. I've met other heroes. He sent back, pouring out the story of his arrival, of Steve and the secret Avengers, of the mission in Madripoor. They're good people. But their world is darker, colder. They think saving everyone is a fairy tale. They want me to make choices I don't know how to make. Nana's expression grew somber. She floated closer, her ghostly hand reaching out as if to touch his cheek. Your spirit, Ninth, has always been your greatest weapon, that burning need to save, to protect. It is the very core of One for All. It is what allowed you to cultivate the other quirks, what allows you to push past your limits. Her voice became grave, a serious warning that transcended the dimensional static. But here, in this world of shadows and hard truths, it is also your most dangerous vulnerability. These people you are with, they have been forged in a different kind of fire. They see your light not as a beacon, but as a liability. A fire that could attract unwanted attention. A fire that could burn them all. What do I do? Deku asked, his desperation echoing in the void. If I change, if I become what they want me to be, I'll lose myself. I'll betray everything All Might taught me. Nana's smile returned, faint but genuine. You will not lose yourself, Izuku Midoriya. You are stronger than that. You will not bend, and you will not break. You will do what you have always done. Her image began to fade, the static growing stronger. You will find a third way. You will show them a better path. That is your burden. That is your purpose. But be careful, Ninth. A flame that burns too brightly in the darkness can cast the longest, most dangerous shadows. Her voice dissolved into the cosmic noise. The connection was lost. Deku's eyes snapped open. He was back in his room. The air was still. The only sound was the hum of the bunker's life support. But Nana's words echoed in his mind, a prophecy and a warning. He was a flame in the dark. And he was beginning to understand that his presence here would do more than just help the Avengers fight their war. It would force them, and him, to confront the very nature of what it meant to be a hero. He was an echo of a brighter world, and he was about to find out if this new, cynical reality could withstand his light, or if it would simply snuff him out. The ghosts of his past had given their warning. Now, all he could do was face the ghosts of his future. The probation ended not with a formal declaration, but with a summons. Deku was in the middle of a grueling CQC session with Bucky, one where he finally managed to land a clean, solid block that actually made the Winter Soldier pause for a fraction of a second, when Steve Rogers' voice echoed from the gym's intercom. Vanguard. Barnes. Report to the Ops Center. Immediately. The tone was clipped urgent. It wasn't a drill. Bucky wiped a sheen of sweat from his brow with the back of his flesh-and-blood hand and gave Deku a curt nod. Let's go. As they walked through the concrete corridors, a low-level hum of activity was palpable. Technicians scurried past, their faces tight with concentration. The base, usually a place of quiet, simmering tension, was now buzzing like a disturbed hornet's nest. Something had broken. The Ops Center was dark, the only light coming from the massive holographic display that dominated the far wall. Steve, Natasha, and Clint were already there, their expressions grim. The image on the screen was a rotating 3D schematic of a high-tech corporate skyscraper, its sleek glass and steel facade looking jarringly out of place against the bunker's brutalist architecture. What's going on? Bucky asked, his voice a low rumble that cut through the tense silence. We cracked it, Clint said from his perch at a secondary console. He gestured at a cascade of decrypted codes scrolling on a smaller screen. The data we pulled from the Madripoor prototype. It was a bust on the cloaking tech, that was a misdirect. But the bearer bonds they were using for payment? They weren't standard issue. Each one was embedded with a microdot containing a shard of encrypted data. It took our best AI weeks, but we finally pieced it together. Steve took over, his gaze fixed on the hologram. The data fragments form a blueprint. Not for a weapon, but for a delivery system. And it all points to this place, Kleisner Biogenetics. He magnified a section of the schematic, showing the company's logo, a stylized double helix. Publicly, Kleisner is a legitimate German pharmaceutical giant, leader in genetic therapies, disease research, the works. Privately, he swiped a hand, and the logo morphed into a familiar, terrifying symbol, a skull with writhing tentacles. It's a legacy Hydra research and development wing. Been hiding in plain sight for 60 years, Deku's blood ran cold. The insidious nature of this enemy was something he was still getting used to. Villains in his world were often flamboyant, their evil a public spectacle. Hydra was a cancer, hiding in the healthy tissue of society. The data points to a specific project, Natasha said, her voice taut. She stepped forward, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Codename Chimera. She pulled up a series of complex biochemical diagrams and genetic sequencing charts. Deku, with his analytical mind and years of studying the biological intricacies of quirks, found himself understanding more than he should have. It looked like a viral vector, a retrovirus designed to rewrite genetic code on a cellular level. What is it? Bucky asked, his eyes narrowed. It's a nightmare, Clint answered grimly. According to the notes, it's a biological agent designed to interface with what they call the metahuman genome. In our world, that means anyone with inherent powers. Inhumans, mutants, mystics, enhanced individuals, anyone whose DNA deviates from the baseline. Natasha zoomed in on a specific protein sequence. The Chimera virus does two things. First, it acts as a universal catalyst. It supercharges a powered individual's abilities, pushing them far beyond their normal limits. An order of magnitude increase, maybe more. But, she said, her voice dropping, it's an unstable reaction. The second thing the virus does is introduce a degenerative feedback loop. The target's own power becomes a poison. Their cellular structure begins to break down under the strain. The process is catastrophic, resulting in a massive, explosive release of biological energy. The implications slammed into Deku with the force of a physical blow. "They're turning people into bombs," he whispered, horrified. "Walking, talking, dirty bombs," Steve confirmed, his jaw tight with fury. "Hydra's plan isn't just to assassinate their enemies. It's to turn our greatest strengths, our protectors, into weapons of terror." Imagine the panic. The fear. A hero saves a bus full of children 1 minute, and the next, they detonate, leveling a city block. Public trust in powered people would be shattered overnight. Governments would demand registration, incarceration. Hydra would just have to step into the chaos and offer a solution. It was diabolical. It was all for one's level of strategic, societal evil. "The intel suggests they're finalizing the catalyst agent at the main Kleisner facility in Berlin," Natasha said, pointing at the skyscraper. "We need to get in, access their mainframe, and download every bit of data they have on Project Chimera. We need to know its composition, its dispersal method, and where they plan to test it. This is an intelligence-gathering mission, same as Madripoor. Only this time, the stakes are infinitely higher." Her eyes flicked to Deku, a silent, pointed warning. "No mistakes. No diversions. It's a fortress," Clint noted, pulling up security schematics. "Pressure plates, biometric scanners, sonic defenses, squads of on-site security. We can't punch our way in." "We won't have to," Steve said. "Kleisner is hosting an international biotech summit tomorrow night. A gala. It's the perfect cover. We go in as guests, get access to the upper floors, and while the party is in full swing, a 2-person team will slip away to the RD labs and access the server room. Bucky and I can handle the infiltration." Natasha volunteered immediately. Steve shook his head. "No. You and I will be on the gala floor, running interference. We're the most recognizable faces. We can draw the attention of corporate security, keep them occupied. Clint, you're on remote overwatch as always, our eye in the sky and guardian angel on the comms." He paused, then looked between Bucky and Deku. "You two are the infiltration team." The air in the room grew thick. Bucky's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. Natasha opened her mouth to protest, but Steve raised a hand to silence her. "Bucky, you're the best ghost we have. But that facility is state-of-the-art. Their internal systems will be a nightmare. Vanguard," he said, turning to Deku, "your mind is your sharpest weapon. You understand this kind of science on an intuitive level. You can process complex data faster than anyone I've ever met. I need you in that server room to identify the critical files. You're not the muscle on this op, you're the brains." It was a test. And it was a statement of trust. After the disaster in Madripoor, Steve was giving him a chance to prove he could be more than a blunt instrument. He was giving him a critical, delicate role at the heart of the mission. "I won't let you down, sir," Deku said, his voice firm. Steve nodded. "I know." He then turned his attention to Bucky. "I need you to get him in and out clean, Buck. Keep him on mission." Bucky gave a single, curt nod. "Understood." But his eyes, when they met Deku's, held a complex mixture of professional resolve and deep-seated wariness. He was a soldier following an order, but he was being partnered with the team's biggest wildcard. "There's one more thing," Natasha said, her voice drawing their attention back to the screen. She pulled up a personnel file, a black and white photo of a severe-looking man in a lab coat appearing on the display. He had cold, clinical eyes and a cruel twist to his lips. "The head of Project Chimera is this man, Dr. Arnim Zola." Bucky went absolutely still. The name hit the room like a physical blow, sucking all the air out of it. Deku didn't recognize the name, but he saw the effect it had on the others. Steve's face hardened into a granite mask. Natasha's professional composure cracked for a fraction of a second, revealing a flicker of pure hatred. "Zola's dead," Bucky stated, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I was there. He died in the 70s, his body did," Steve corrected, his voice grim. "But his mind, his consciousness, was uploaded to a computer system. S.H.I.E.L.D. thought they destroyed it when the Triskelion fell. They were wrong. It seems a fragment of his code survived, a digital ghost. Hydra has given him a new home at Kleisner Biogenetics. He's running the project. The mission had just become personal. Deku looked at Bucky. The Winter Soldier's face was pale beneath his stubble. His eyes were fixed on Zola's picture, but he was seeing something else. A chair. A machine. A torrent of electricity and a string of trigger words. He was seeing the ghost that had built his prison. Bucky, Steve said gently. If this is too much, I'm fine. Bucky bit out, his voice like grinding metal. He tore his gaze away from the screen and looked at Steve, his eyes burning with a cold fire Deku had never seen before. Let's go hunt a ghost. The Kleisner Biogenetics Tower was a shard of glass and light stabbing into the Berlin night sky. The gala was in full swing, a glittering affair of champagne, string quartets, and the hushed, self-important murmur of corporate espionage masquerading as polite conversation. From their position in a darkened stairwell on the 48th floor, Deku and Bucky could hear the faint, muffled sounds of the party below. They had bypassed the main elevators, using a series of maintenance shafts and restricted access corridors to make their way up, moving with a silence born of Natasha's grueling training and Bucky's lifetime of practice. They were both clad in sleek, dark gray infiltration suits that hugged their forms and deadened their sound. The material was designed to scatter light and thermal imaging, making them little more than moving smudges of shadow to most sensor systems. Bucky pressed his fingers to his comm unit. Barnes to Rogers. We're at the RD airlock. Ready to proceed. Copy that, soldier. Steve's voice replied, a faint undercurrent of party chatter behind it. Natasha is currently distracting the head of security with a fascinating story about her fictitious history in venture capitalism. You've got a window. Hawkeye, you see anything? All clear on my end. Came Clint's voice, crisp and clear from his perch in a building half a mile away. No unexpected patrols. The floor is yours, boys. Try not to break anything this time, Vanguard. Deku winced at the light-hearted jab. Copy that, Hawkeye. Bucky shot him a look, then turned his attention to the formidable door in front of them. It was a seamless slab of reinforced titanium with a single biometric handprint scanner glowing ominously in the center. All right, kid, Bucky murmured. This is the first test. This entire floor is a clean room. The air pressure is higher on the other side to keep contaminants out. The moment we crack this seal, internal sensors will register the pressure drop and trigger an alert unless we can override the environmental controls first. The control panel is on the other side of the door. Deku noted, studying the schematics on his wrist-mounted display. Exactly, Bucky said. He pulled a small, circular device from his belt. This is a plasma torch. It can cut through that door in about 90 seconds. But it's loud. The moment I start, we're on the clock. You need to be ready to move fast. He affixed the torch to the door over the locking mechanism. Once I'm through, I'll take out the 2 guards stationed inside. While I'm doing that, you have exactly 10 seconds to get to that panel and slice into the system to disable the pressure alarm. Can you do it? Deku's heart was pounding, but his mind was crystal clear. This was a problem with variables and a time limit. He could do this. I can. Good, Bucky grunted. He placed his hand over the torch's activation button. On my mark, the torch hissed to life, an intensely bright, silent pinpoint of light that began to melt through the titanium. Bucky's body was a study in coiled tension, his eyes fixed on the door, his flesh and blood hand resting on the hilt of the combat knife sheath on his vest. The 90 seconds felt like an eternity. Deku's mind raced, rehearsing the sequence of code he'd need to input, visualizing the layout of the lab on the other side. The torch cut out. A perfect circle of molten metal fell inward with a soft clink. Bucky was through the hole before it even hit the floor. Deku followed a second later. The lab was sterile and white, bathed in the cold glow of overhead lights. He saw 2 figures in white security uniforms crumple to the ground as Bucky moved between them, a silent, efficient predator. There were no gunshots, just the soft thud of bodies hitting the linoleum. Panel! Bucky hissed. Deku was already moving. He sprinted to the wall-mounted console, his fingers flying across the touchscreen. He jacked in a small device from his belt, a SHIELD issue hacking tool. A wall of Hydra encryption filled the screen. It was good. Very good. But it was logical. It was code. It was a language he understood. 7 seconds. He bypassed the first firewall, routed the alarm signal into a closed loop, and killed the pressure sensors. 4 seconds. He found the master system, entered a root command, and deactivated the entire alert program for their sector, erasing their electronic footprint. 1 second. Done! He breathed, just as a small green light on the console flicked to red, indicating the system would have tripped. He had made it. Bucky was already dragging the bodies into a storage closet. He gave Deku a look. It was the same, almost imperceptible nod from the gym. Approval. Not bad, kid, he murmured. Server room is at the end of the main corridor. Let's move. Stay close and do exactly as I say. They moved down the pristine hallway, a ghost and his shadow. The laboratory was a maze of glass-walled rooms filled with humming, complex machinery. Centrifuges spun, robotic arms manipulated vials of glowing liquids, and monitors displayed endless streams of genetic data. But it was all automated. There wasn't a single person in sight. The entire facility felt like a tomb. Something's wrong, Bucky whispered, his body language shifting from cautious to hyper-alert. It's too quiet. Too empty. Maybe the staff all went down to the party, Deku suggested. Hydra RD scientists don't take party breaks, Bucky countered. Keep your eyes open. They reached the server room at the end of the hall. It was protected by another heavy door, this one with a sophisticated keypad lock. Bucky began to work on it, using a set of delicate tools to bypass the hardware. As Bucky worked, Deku's attention was drawn to the main observation window of the central laboratory. Inside was a massive, cylindrical containment chamber, humming with a low, thrumming energy. Wires and pipes snaked from it to a bank of supercomputers. The air around the chamber seemed to shimmer, and inside, a faint, sickly green mist swirled. The catalyst chamber, Deku breathed, recognizing it from the blueprints. That must be where they're synthesizing the final agent. He stepped closer to the glass, his analytical curiosity overriding his caution for a moment. He scanned the readouts on the nearby monitors. They were displaying energy fluctuation levels, cellular degradation rates, and a biological signature that made his stomach drop. The energy signature of the Chimera agent, the way it was designed to bond with and amplify existing power. It was eerily, terrifyingly similar to One for All. It wasn't identical, but it was like a distorted echo, a corrupted, malignant copy. Bucky, Deku said, his voice tight. They know I'm here. Not here in this building, I mean here, in this world. Bucky didn't look up from the lock. What are you talking about? This virus, Deku said, his mind racing. It's designed to replicate and overload a power source. The energy patterns they're using as a template. It's a match for the energy I gave off when I first arrived in New York. They must have detected the energy spike from my arrival. They didn't know what it was, but they analyzed it. They'd been trying to replicate One for All's core mechanism. The lock clicked open. Get in. Get the data, Bucky ordered, pushing the door open and sweeping the room with his weapon. We can have an identity crisis later. The server room was cold and dark, the only light coming from the blinking LEDs of a dozen monolithic server towers. Deku rushed to the central terminal and jacked in. He had to work fast. As his program began to slice through Zola's firewalls, a voice, synthesized and chillingly familiar to Bucky, echoed through the lab's speakers. An impressive display of infiltration, Sergeant Barnes. You have not lost your touch. Bucky froze, his entire body going rigid. He raised his rifle, scanning the empty corridor. Zola, correct. The voice crackled. It has been a long time. I see you have brought a guest. The anomaly. The source of our fascinating new energy readings. A happy coincidence, your arrival. You have saved us years of theoretical research. A screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying a distorted, green and black digital face. It was the face from the photograph, now rendered in horrifying, pixelated detail. Arnim Zola, we're made. Clint's voice snapped in their ears. Massive energy surge from your position. Every guard in the building is heading your way. You have 2 minutes, maybe less. Kid, how long? Bucky barked, his rifle aimed at the door. It's a huge data cache. Another 90 seconds at least. Deku replied, his fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. Oh, you will have all the time you need, Zola's voice purred. In fact, I insist you stay for a demonstration. You see, Project Chimera is not quite complete. We have the catalyst, but we lacked a suitable test subject. Until now, with a loud hiss of hydraulics, blast doors slammed down over the entrances to the corridor, sealing them in. Red emergency lights began to flash, bathing the sterile lab in a hellish crimson glow. What's he talking about? Deku asked, his eyes still glued to the download progress bar. 70%. Bucky was looking at the main lab, at the swirling green mist in the containment chamber. He's not talking about us. On Zola's command, a section of the floor in the main lab slid open, and a platform rose. Strapped to a vertical gurney was a man. He was dressed in the tatters of a Hydra uniform, his body covered in bruises and cuts. He was conscious, his eyes wide with terror. This is Subject Epsilon, Zola explained calmly. A loyal, if unimaginative, soldier who had the misfortune of failing me one too many times. But in failure, he will find a new purpose. He will be the first of many. A martyr for a new age. A series of needles descended from the top of the chamber, plunging into the soldier's arms. The sickly green mist was pumped from the main cylinder and injected directly into the man's bloodstream. He screamed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. His body began to convulse violently. A faint, dark energy started to radiate from him, an aura of pure power. What was his power? Bucky asked, his knuckles white where he gripped his rifle. His file says he was a low-level kinetic manipulator, Deku said, his voice trembling as he watched the horror unfold. He could move small objects with his mind. A glorified party trick, but the man on the gurney was now doing more than party tricks. The metal restraints holding him began to buckle and groan, twisted by an unseen force. The lights in the lab flickered violently. The very air began to vibrate. Download at 95%! Deku shouted. Behold, Sergeant! Zola's voice boomed. The birth of a new kind of weapon! The man let out one final, guttural roar. The kinetic energy erupting from him was no longer controlled. It was a raw, untamed force. The gurney was torn from its moorings. The containment chamber's reinforced glass began to crack under the strain. Download complete! Deku yelled, yanking the drive from the port. We have to go! No exit! Bucky yelled back, just as the containment chamber exploded. A wave of pure telekinetic force erupted outwards. Glass, metal, and equipment were shredded and flung across the lab. Deku instinctively threw himself to the floor, raising his arms to shield his head. Bucky was slammed back against the wall, the impact knocking the wind out of him. The HYDRA soldier, now free, floated in the center of the ruined lab. He was no longer human. His eyes glowed with a malevolent purple light, and arcs of kinetic energy danced across his skin. He was a being of pure, unstable power, his mind clearly shattered by the transformation. He looked at Deku and Bucky, the only other living things in the room, and let out a sound that was half shriek, half sob. The mission was over. The trial by fire had just begun. Trapped in a sealed lab with a living, ticking time bomb and the ghost of the man who had created the Winter Soldier, Deku knew one thing with absolute certainty. There was no clean way out of this. Natasha's lesson about the ledger was about to get a very practical, and very bloody, demonstration.